The sun hung low over the mountains as Zachariah Barnes dragged himself up the dusty path leading to his ranch house, his body heavy with exhaustion and grief. It had been exactly 3 months since Mary's passing, and the weight of her absence still tore at him like a physical wound. The Arizona Territory of 1878 was unforgiving to a man alone with 3 children who needed more than he knew how to give. As he approached the weathered 2-story home that sat just outside Georgetown, Arizona, he heard the telltale sounds of chaos within. Glass shattered, followed by his 10-year-old son William's angry shout. His daughter's voices rose in response, 12-year-old Sarah screaming accusations, while 6-year-old Hannah wailed inconsolably. Zachariah removed his worn Stetson and wiped the sweat from his brow before pushing open the door. The scene before him was becoming alarmingly familiar. The dinner table was overturned, beans spilled across the wooden floor. William stood red-faced in the corner, his small fists clenched in rage. Sarah had her arms crossed over her chest, her mother's stubborn chin thrust forward defiantly. Little Hannah sat amidst the mess, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "What in God's name is going on here?" Zachariah demanded, his voice cracking with fatigue. William started it. Sarah pointed an accusing finger. "He said Mama ain't ever coming back and that we're all gonna die out here too." William's eyes flashed. "I just told the truth. You're the one who keeps lying to Hannah, telling her Mama's watching from heaven. Mama's dead and buried and she ain't watching nothing." Hannah's sobs intensified, her small body shaking. Zachariah closed his eyes briefly, summoning what little patience remained after a day of hard labor at the silver mine. Since Mary had succumbed to pneumonia that brutal winter, he'd taken extra shifts to keep food on the table. The ranch was struggling without Mary's careful management, and the children were like wild creatures consuming one another in their grief. "That's enough," he said firmly. "William, help your sister clean this up. Sarah, get Hannah washed for bed. You're never even here." William shot back, tears finally breaking through his anger. "You don't care what happens to us." The accusation stung worse than any physical blow. "I'm keeping this roof over your head and food in your bellies, boy," Zachariah said, his voice low with restrained emotion. "That's what your father does." "We need more than food," Sarah whispered, suddenly looking older than her years. We need. She couldn't finish, but Zachariah knew what she couldn't say. They needed their mother. They needed Mary's gentle touch, her patient words, her unwavering love. And that was the one thing he couldn't provide. Later that night, after the children had finally fallen into restless sleep, Zachariah sat at the kitchen table with a letter from the schoolhouse. Miss Peterson, their teacher, had written expressing concerns about all 3 children. William's fighting, Sarah's withdrawal, Hannah's inability to focus. The letter suggested he seek help, perhaps a housekeeper or a governess. Zachariah laughed bitterly. With what money? The ranch was barely breaking even, and the mine work was just enough to keep them from starving. No woman with any sense would take on this broken family for the pittance he could offer. Still, desperation drove him to pen a short advertisement the next morning before heading to work. Situation available for capable woman. Room, board, and small stipend in exchange for housekeeping and childcare. 3 children, ages 12, 10, and 6. Ranch work. Georgetown, Arizona Territory. Inquire Z. Barnes, Silver Creek Ranch. He dropped it at the newspaper office in town with little hope. Then he headed to the mine for another 16-hour shift, praying the children wouldn't burn the house down before he returned. 200 miles away in Tucson, Eleanor Thompson folded the letter from her brother and stared out the dusty window of the boarding house. Her position as a schoolteacher had ended abruptly, when the town council decided a woman with her history shouldn't be influencing young minds. At 26, Eleanor's options were limited. She could return east in disgrace to her disapproving parents, or she could forge ahead somewhere new. The newspaper on her small table was open to the advertisements section, and her eyes kept returning to one particular notice. Georgetown was far enough from Tucson that her reputation wouldn't follow her. And children. She loved children. Perhaps this was the fresh start she needed. Within the week, Eleanor had packed her meager belongings and purchased passage on the stagecoach heading north. The journey was grueling, hot, dusty, and fraught with the dangers of the open territory. But after 3 days of travel, the coach rolled into Georgetown just as the afternoon sun was beginning its descent. The small town looked like countless others she had seen in her 4 years in the Arizona Territory, a main street with a general store, saloon, sheriff's office, and a smattering of other businesses. It was the height of summer, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Eleanor hired a local boy to carry her trunk and guide her to the Silver Creek Ranch. As they crested the final hill, she saw the ranch spread out before her, a weathered but well-built house, a barn in need of paint, corrals, and beyond, grazing land stretching toward distant mountains. It was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way. Her young guide pointed toward the house. "That's the Barnes place. Mr. Barnes usually ain't home till dark. He works the mine since Mrs. Barnes died. The kids might be around, though." Eleanor's heart constricted at the information. Motherless children. No wonder the advertisement had sounded desperate. "Thank you," she said, pressing a coin into the boy's palm. "I can manage from here." As she approached the house, she heard shouting from inside, followed by a crash. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her travel-worn dress and knocked firmly on the door. The shouting stopped instantly. After a long pause, the door cracked open to reveal a girl with dark braids and suspicious eyes. "Who are you?" the girl demanded. "My name is Miss Thompson." "Eleanor Thompson. I've come about the position your father advertised." The girl's eyes widened. She turned and shouted over her shoulder, "William, there's a lady here says Pa's looking to hire her." Heavy footsteps approached, and the door opened wider to reveal a boy who was tall for his age, with a defiant set to his jaw that couldn't quite hide his vulnerability. "Pa ain't here," he said flatly. "He's at the mine." "May I wait for him?" Eleanor asked gently. William seemed about to refuse when a small voice piped up from behind him. "Is she gonna be our new mama?" Eleanor saw a little girl with blonde curls peering around her brother's legs, her face streaked with dirt and what looked like jam. "No," William answered harshly. "Nobody's replacing Mama." Eleanor knelt to the little girl's eye level. "I'm Miss Thompson. I'm not here to replace your mama. I'm here to help take care of the house and maybe help you with your lessons." "What's your name?" "Hannah," the girl whispered. "I'm 6. It's very nice to meet you, Hannah." "And you must be William, and—" She looked up at the older girl. "Sarah," the girl supplied reluctantly. "Pa won't be home for hours. You might as well come in, I guess." The interior of the house reflected the chaos of children left to their own devices for too long. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, clothes were strewn about, and the floor hadn't seen a broom in what appeared to be weeks. "Have you had anything to eat today?" Eleanor asked, taking in their thin faces. The children exchanged glances. "We had some bread for breakfast," Sarah admitted. "Pa leaves food, but—" "William burned the beans," Hannah added helpfully. "I did not. They stuck to the pot," William protested. Eleanor set down her handbag. "Well then, while we wait for your father, perhaps I could fix something for supper. If you show me where things are kept, we could work together." The children watched her warily, but hunger won out over suspicion. Sarah showed her to the pantry, which contained basic supplies: flour, beans, salt pork, and some withered vegetables. Not much, but enough to create a decent meal. With gentle coaxing, Eleanor got all three children involved. Hannah scrubbed potatoes under her watchful eye, Sarah measured ingredients, and William, after initial resistance, agreed to fetch water and tend the fire. As they worked, Eleanor asked questions about their lives, their school, their interests, careful to keep the conversation light. By the time Zachariah Barnes trudged up the path to his home, the sun had long set. His body ached with fatigue, and he dreaded what he might find inside. Lately, the children had taken to going to bed hungry rather than attempting to cook, and he hadn't had time to prepare anything before leaving at dawn. The smell of cooking food stopped him in his tracks. Lamplight glowed warmly through the windows, and he heard something that had become rare in his household: laughter. He pushed open the door cautiously and froze at the sight before him. His kitchen was cleaner than it had been in months. The table was set. A pot of something savory bubbled on the stove, and his three children were seated with a stranger, a young woman who was demonstrating how to fold a napkin into the shape of a bird for a delighted Hannah. They all looked up at his entrance. For a moment, no one spoke. "Pa." Hannah broke the silence, holding up her napkin creation. "Look what Miss Thompson showed me." The woman, Miss Thompson, rose gracefully to her feet. She was pretty in an understated way, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical style and clear, intelligent eyes. Her dress was simple but neat, showing signs of the long journey she must have made. "Mr. Barnes," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm Eleanor Thompson. I've come about the position you advertised." Zachariah realized he was still standing in the doorway, hat in hand, covered in silver dust and sweat. He'd almost forgotten about the advertisement, having received no responses in the 2 weeks since he'd placed it. "Miss Thompson," he managed, stepping fully into the room and closing the door. "You've come a long way." "From Tucson," she confirmed. "I hope I'm not intruding by arriving before you returned, but your children were kind enough to welcome me." William snorted at this description of their earlier reception, earning a sharp glance from Sarah. "We made supper, Pa," Sarah said. "Miss Thompson showed us how to make her special stew with dumplings on top." The normalcy of the scene, his children at the table, food ready, the house in order, hit Zachariah like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. That's mighty kind," he finally said. "I should wash up." "Of course," Eleanor replied. "We'll wait for you." When Zachariah returned, face and hands scrubbed clean, he found himself seated at the head of his own table for the first meal he hadn't prepared himself since Mary died. The stew was simple but flavorful, far better than his basic cooking. The conversation was stilted at first. Zachariah had grown unaccustomed to mealtime talk, usually eating quickly before collapsing into bed. But Miss Thompson gently drew the children out, asking about their day and sharing stories of her journey from Tucson. After the meal, when the children had been sent to wash up for bed, Zachariah found himself alone with Miss Thompson for the first time. "I should explain the position," he said awkwardly. "It's not much I can offer. Room, board, and $20 a month. The work is hard, keeping house, minding the children, helping with their studies. I'm gone from dawn till dusk most days." Eleanor's gaze was direct. "Mr. Barnes, I understand what's being asked. I was a teacher before coming here, and I'm not afraid of hard work or children in need of guidance." Something in her phrasing caught his attention. "Was a teacher?" A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, circumstances changed." Zachariah nodded slowly. Everyone had their stories, their reasons for starting fresh in places like Georgetown. He wasn't one to pry. The children have been Difficult since their mother passed, he said instead. They're good kids at heart, but they're hurting. Children often express grief in ways adults struggle to understand, Eleanor said gently. They need patience and consistency. Both in short supply around here lately, Zachariah admitted. Miss Thompson, I'm offering a poor situation, but if you're willing to try, so am I. Eleanor smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. I'd like that very much, Mr. Barnes. And please call me Eleanor. Zachariah, he offered in return, extending his hand. Her handshake was firm, her palm calloused from work despite her educated speech. This was no delicate Eastern flower, he realized, but a woman who understood the realities of territorial life. That night, after showing Eleanor to the small bedroom that had once been Mary's sewing room, Zachariah lay awake longer than his exhaustion should have allowed. For the first time in months, his children had gone to bed with full stomachs and without tears or fighting. The house smelled of food instead of neglect. And somewhere down the hall, a stranger slept who had, in the space of a single evening, brought a small measure of peace to his broken home. He didn't dare hope it would last, but for tonight, it was enough. Eleanor woke before dawn, accustomed to early rising from her teaching days. The small room was sparsely furnished: a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a hook on the wall for her few dresses. Through the window, she could see the eastern sky beginning to lighten over the distant mountains. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, careful not to wake the household. Her plan was to have breakfast ready before Zachariah left for the mine and the children rose for the day. A good first impression could make all the difference in how the family accepted her presence. To her surprise, Zachariah was already in the kitchen, stoking the stove fire and setting a pot of coffee to boil. "You're up early," he said, straightening at her entrance. "I could say the same of you," she replied. "Mining shift starts at sunrise." He gestured to the coffee pot. "Should be ready soon if you'd like some." "Thank you." Eleanor began gathering ingredients for a simple breakfast. "Do the children have any morning responsibilities before school?" Zachariah ran a hand through his already disheveled dark hair. "They should. Collecting eggs, feeding the horses, since Mary, well, routine has suffered. Perhaps we can begin establishing one today," Eleanor suggested, measuring flour for biscuits. "Children thrive on knowing what's expected of them." Zachariah watched her efficient movements with something like wonder. "You seem mighty sure of yourself, Miss Thompson." "Eleanor," she reminded him. "And I'm not sure of much, Mr. Barnes, but I do know children. I've taught enough of them to understand that boundaries provide security, especially when everything else feels uncertain." Their conversation was interrupted by shuffling footsteps on the stairs. Sarah appeared, her dark hair in a messy braid, eyes widening at the sight of Eleanor. "You're still here," she said, sounding surprised. "I am," Eleanor confirmed warmly. "Good morning, Sarah. Would you like to help me with breakfast while your father finishes his coffee?" The girl hesitated, then nodded, moving to stand beside Eleanor at the table. By the time William and Hannah joined them, drawn by the smell of baking biscuits, breakfast was nearly ready. Eleanor had Sarah setting the table, and she gently directed William to fetch fresh water and Hannah to fold napkins using the technique Eleanor had shown her the previous evening. The meal was simple: biscuits, gravy, and fried eggs, but the children ate with enthusiasm. Zachariah, watching his family at the table, felt something loosen in his chest. For months, breakfast had been a rushed, silent affair, everyone moving like ghosts around each other. Now there was conversation, purpose, even the occasional smile. "I've got to head out," he said reluctantly, rising from the table. "Children, you mind Miss Thompson while I'm gone. Help her get settled and show her where everything is kept. When will you be back, Pa?" Hannah asked, a question that always squeezed his heart with guilt. Same time as always, little one. Miss Thompson will take good care of you until then. As he donned his hat and headed for the door, Eleanor followed him onto the porch. Mr. Barnes, Zachariah, she said quietly. I thought perhaps I might have the children help me with a thorough cleaning of the house today, and then assess where they stand with their studies. The school term doesn't begin for another month, but I'd like to know what areas need attention. Zachariah nodded, strangely moved by her thoughtfulness. That sounds fine. They know their chores, though they've been neglecting them. The barn needs mucking out and the garden's overrun with weeds. We'll make a start, she promised. Rome wasn't built in a day, after all. He almost smiled at that. No, I reckon it wasn't. Good day to you, Miss Eleanor. As he walked away, he heard her calling the children to help clear the breakfast dishes. The sound of their voices, with Eleanor's calm direction weaving through them, followed him down the path. For the first time in months, he left for work without the crushing weight of worry about what might befall his children in his absence. That first day set the pattern for those that followed. Eleanor rose early to prepare breakfast before Zachariah left for the mine. Then she and the children tackled the considerable task of bringing order back to the neglected ranch. The work was exhausting. The house required thorough cleaning from top to bottom. The garden, once Mary's pride, was choked with weeds. The barn was in disarray, and basic maintenance had been ignored throughout the property. But Eleanor approached each task methodically, involving the children in ways that suited their ages and abilities. William, despite his initial resistance, responded well to being treated as the man of the house in his father's absence. Sarah's maternal instincts toward Hannah were channeled into productive teaching moments, and little Hannah blossomed under the consistent attention and gentle boundaries. By the end of the first week, the transformation was visible. The house was clean, meals appeared regularly on the table, and the children went to bed each night tired from honest work rather than emotional exhaustion. Evenings became a time for assessment of the day's accomplishments and planning for the next. Eleanor instituted a ritual of reading aloud after supper, stories that captivated even William, who pretended indifference while leaning forward to catch every word. Zachariah, returning home each night to increasing order and decreasing chaos, found himself watching Eleanor with growing appreciation. She never complained about the difficult conditions or the children's occasional rebellions. Instead, she met each challenge with steady determination and surprising creativity. When William refused to help with the mending, claiming it was women's work, Eleanor showed him how sailors on great ships repaired their own clothes and sails. When Sarah balked at learning mathematics, Eleanor demonstrated how calculating proportions was essential for adjusting recipes. When Hannah threw a tantrum over having to practice her letters, Eleanor created a treasure hunt with clues written in simple words that Hannah had to read to find a small treat. 2 weeks into Eleanor's tenure, Zachariah returned from work to find the house unusually quiet. Concerned, he entered quickly, only to discover Eleanor and all 3 children seated at the clean kitchen table, absorbed in books. William was frowning in concentration over a volume of American history. Sarah was working sums on a slate, and Hannah was carefully copying letters while Eleanor gently guided her hand. They looked up at his entrance, and for a moment, Zachariah saw his family as it could be not healed completely from Mary's loss, but functioning, learning, growing. And at the center of this tableau was Eleanor, her auburn hair escaping its pins after a long day's work, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of meaningful labor. "Welcome home," she said simply. Something turned over in his chest at those words. Home. For months, The ranch had been merely a place of shelter, a painful reminder of all they had lost. But now, somehow, it was becoming a home again. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor sat with Zachariah on the porch, a rare moment of adult conversation in their busy days. "They're making progress," she said, looking out at the star-filled sky. "William helped me repair the chicken coop today without a single complaint, and Sarah is quite gifted with figures once she applies herself. And Hannah," Eleanor smiled, "Hannah is a sunshine child. Her grief manifests differently. She forgets for long stretches, then remembers suddenly and deeply. But children her age are resilient. She's learning her letters well." Zachariah nodded, twisting his battered hat in his hands. "I never thanked you properly for what you've done here." "I'm merely doing what you hired me to do," Eleanor replied. "No," he said firmly. "What I hired you to do was keep them from burning the place down or killing each other. What you're doing is more." In the dim light from the kitchen window, he could see a faint blush color her cheeks. "They're wonderful children, Zachariah. They've endured a terrible loss, but with consistency and patience, they'll find their way through it." "And what about you?" he asked suddenly. "You never speak of your life before coming here." Eleanor tensed slightly. "There's not much to tell. I taught school in Tucson for 4 years, before that in St. Louis. And your family, back east, in Boston." Her tone discouraged further inquiry, and Zachariah respected the boundary. "Well, we're fortunate that your path led you here," he said instead. Eleanor's smile returned, soft in the darkness. "Perhaps I'm the fortunate one." As August gave way to September, life at Silver Creek Ranch settled into a rhythm. The house ran smoothly under Eleanor's guidance. The children, while still experiencing moments of grief and rebellion, were noticeably calmer and more purposeful. They had begun to trust that Eleanor wouldn't disappear, that her rules were consistent, and that her affection was genuine. School would be starting soon, and Eleanor spent evenings ensuring the children were prepared. William, though bright, had fallen behind due to his disruptive behavior the previous term. Sarah was academically strong but had withdrawn socially after her mother's death. Hannah would be entering her first formal year and was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Eleanor addressed each child's needs differently. For William, she created challenging projects that captured his imagination while reinforcing basic skills. For Sarah, she encouraged letter writing to a cousin back east, helping the girl express feelings she struggled to voice. For Hannah, she made learning into games that built confidence. Zachariah observed these efforts with growing admiration. Eleanor possessed a natural understanding of his children that he sometimes felt he lacked. Where he saw only their grief mirroring his own, she seemed to see the individual struggles beneath. One evening in mid-September, Zachariah returned from the mine earlier than usual. The foreman had released the men due to equipment failure that would take a day to repair. As he approached the house, he heard music. Eleanor's clear voice accompanied by the old piano that had stood silent since Mary's death. He entered quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Eleanor sat at the piano with Hannah beside her on the bench, teaching the little girl a simple tune. Sarah stood nearby, singing along softly, while William sat in the corner, pretending to whittle but clearly listening. "Come Josephine in my flying machine, going up she goes, they sang. The simple tune filling the house with something it had desperately lacked: joy. Zachariah remained in the doorway, unwilling to break the spell. Eleanor's fingers moved confidently over the yellowed keys of the instrument Mary had loved so dearly. Her voice wasn't remarkable in any technical sense, but it carried warmth and life that seemed to embrace his children. When the song ended, Hannah spotted him. "Pa's home early," she exclaimed, sliding off the bench and running to him. Zachariah scooped her up, inhaling the clean scent of soap in her hair, another of Eleanor's daily rituals. "The mine's closed until tomorrow," he explained. "Thought I might take you all fishing at the creek if Miss Eleanor doesn't have other plans for you." "Fishing?" William perked up immediately. Even Sarah looked interested. Eleanor rose from the piano bench, smoothing her skirt. "I think that's a wonderful idea. It's too fine a day to stay indoors. I'll pack some food for a picnic." The afternoon that followed was one Zachariah knew he would remember for years to come. The September sun was warm but not scorching as they made their way to the creek that gave the ranch its name. William proudly carried the fishing poles, while Sarah and Eleanor managed the picnic basket between them. Hannah skipped ahead, then back, unable to contain her excitement. At the creek, Zachariah showed the children how to bait their hooks and cast their lines, skills that had grown rusty in recent months. Eleanor spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree and arranged their simple meal of bread, cheese, and apple preserves. "Don't you want to fish, Miss Eleanor?" Hannah asked, temporarily abandoning her own small pole. "I've never learned how," Eleanor admitted. "Perhaps you could teach me." Hannah's face lit up at the opportunity to be the instructor rather than the student. With great seriousness, she demonstrated the technique Zachariah had just shown her, her small hands guiding Eleanor's larger ones on the fishing pole. Zachariah, helping William untangle his line nearby, found himself watching the interaction with a peculiar tightness in his chest. Eleanor's patience with Hannah's earnest but confused instructions, her willingness to follow the child's lead, these were qualities Mary had possessed in abundance. The thought of Mary didn't bring the usual stabbing pain. Instead, he felt a bittersweet acknowledgement that while she was irreplaceable, life somehow continued. His children were laughing again. His home was functioning again. And a woman he'd known less than 2 months had become essential to that recovery. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. They caught 4 small trout, which Eleanor insisted on cleaning herself after careful instruction from Zachariah. The children watched in fascination as she tackled the messy task without complaint, her capable hands moving with increasing confidence. "You're a quick study," Zachariah observed as she finished the last fish. "Life requires adaptability," she replied simply. Then, with a smile that transformed her serious face, she added, "Though I admit, teaching multiplication tables prepared me very little for fish preparation." Their shared laughter felt like the beginning of something neither was quite ready to name. That evening, after a supper of fresh fish and the remaining picnic provisions, the children were unusually subdued, tired from the day's activities, but in a contented way Zachariah hadn't seen in months. As Eleanor supervised their preparation for bed, Zachariah sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His mind kept returning to the image of Eleanor at the creek, laughing as she held up her first fish, her auburn hair coming loose from its pins, her usually neat dress spattered with creek water. Something was changing between them, a shift so subtle he might not have noticed if he weren't so acutely aware of her every movement, her every expression. It both exhilarated and terrified him. Mary had been gone less than a year. Was it disloyal to feel this stirring of interest in another woman? And what of Eleanor herself? He knew almost nothing about her life before Georgetown. She spoke of teaching in Tucson and St. Louis, of a family in Boston, but the details remained vague. When the children asked direct questions about her past, she redirected them gently but firmly. Zachariah respected her privacy. Everyone in the Arizona territory carried secrets or sorrows. It was often why they'd come west in the first place. But as his feelings for Eleanor deepened, he couldn't help wondering what shadows she kept hidden. His contemplation was interrupted by Eleanor's soft footfall on the porch boards. "The children are settled," she said, joining him on the bench. "Hannah asked for an extra story. She's still excited from catching her fish." "Thank you for today," Zachariah said. "For everything, really. I don't know where we'd be if you hadn't answered that advertisement." In the dim light from the kitchen window, he saw Eleanor's profile as she gazed out at the night. "I needed this place as much as it needed me," she said quietly. "Perhaps more." It was the most revealing statement she'd made about her circumstances, and Zachariah sensed an opening. "Eleanor," he began carefully, "I don't mean to pry, but what brought you all the way from Tucson to answer an advertisement for such a modest position? You're educated, experienced. Surely there were better opportunities." She was silent for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. "Sometimes we find ourselves at crossroads not of our choosing. My position in Tucson became untenable. I needed to leave quickly, and your advertisement seemed providential." "Untenable how?" he pressed gently. Eleanor sighed, turning to face him. In the shadows, her expression was unreadable, but her posture conveyed resignation. "I was accused of improper conduct by a powerful man in the community, a school board member whose advances I had rejected. Rather than cause a scandal that would harm the school, I resigned. But small towns have long memories, and teaching positions require irreproachable reputations." Anger flared in Zachariah's chest. "That's unjust. It's the reality women often face," Eleanor replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than self-pitying. "I could have fought the rumors, but to what end? The children would have suffered during the controversy. And so I left, hoping to start fresh somewhere my history wouldn't follow." "And your family in Boston couldn't help," a humorless laugh escaped her. "My father is a minister who values reputation above all else. My moral failing, as he would see it, would only confirm his belief that my decision to come west was driven by unseemly independence." Zachariah absorbed this information slowly. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "that you had to leave a position you clearly loved and that you faced such injustice." "Don't be," she said, her voice softening. "It led me here to Silver Creek, to William, Sarah, and Hannah, and to—" She hesitated, then continued more carefully, "to work that matters deeply." The unspoken words hung between them in the night air. Zachariah felt a powerful urge to reach for her hand, to bridge the small physical distance that seemed suddenly charged with possibility. Before he could act on the impulse, a cry from inside the house shattered the moment. Hannah's voice, high with distress, called out for her mother. Eleanor was on her feet immediately, moving toward the door with Zachariah close behind. They found Hannah sitting upright in bed, tears streaming down her face, clearly caught in the grip of a nightmare. "Mama," she sobbed as Eleanor gathered her into her arms. "I want Mama." "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor murmured, stroking the child's tangled curls. "I know you do." Zachariah stood helplessly in the doorway, watching as Eleanor rocked his youngest child. Hannah's cries for her mother were like physical blows, reminding him sharply of all he couldn't provide. "Would you like to tell me about your dream?" Eleanor asked softly when Hannah's sobs had quieted somewhat. Hannah hiccuped. "Mama was at the creek today. She was watching us but couldn't talk to us. She looked sad." Zachariah closed his eyes against a surge of grief. These night terrors had been frequent in the months after Mary's death, but had gradually subsided. He should have expected that a happy family day might trigger Hannah's sense of loss. Eleanor met his gaze over Hannah's head, her eyes communicating understanding. "Your mama loves you very much, Hannah," she said gently. And I believe she's happy that you had fun today, not sad. Do you know why? Hannah shook her head, her small face pressed against Eleanor's shoulder. Because mamas want their children to be happy, even when they can't be with them. That's the most important thing to a mama's heart. How do you know? Hannah whispered. Eleanor brushed damp curls from the child's forehead. Because that's what love is. And your mama loved you very, very much. The simple words, spoken with such certainty, seemed to comfort Hannah. Gradually, her breathing slowed and her body relaxed against Eleanor. Will you stay until I fall asleep? She asked. Of course, Eleanor promised, settling more comfortably on the edge of the bed. Zachariah retreated quietly, his emotions too complex to untangle. He returned to the porch, needing the open air to clear his head. Eleanor joined him nearly an hour later, after ensuring Hannah was deeply asleep. I'm sorry, Zachariah said as soon as she appeared. These episodes happen less frequently now, but they still come without warning. There's no need to apologize, Eleanor assured him. Grief doesn't follow predictable patterns, especially in children. Hannah had a wonderful day, and that very joy reminded her of what's missing. How did you know what to say to her? Zachariah asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. About Mary being happy that Hannah enjoyed herself. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I lost my mother when I was 15, she said finally. Not much older than Sarah. For years, I felt guilty whenever I experienced happiness, as though my joy was a betrayal of her memory. It took me a long time to understand that she would have wanted my happiness above all else. I didn't know, Zachariah said softly. It's not something I speak of often, but it helps me understand what your children are experiencing, each in their own way. The revelation created a new connection between them, a shared understanding of loss that went beyond words. This time, when the impulse came to take her hand, Zachariah didn't resist it. Eleanor's fingers were cool against his calloused palm, but they curled around his with quiet certainty. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars and holding hands like shy youngsters, both aware that something significant had shifted between them. As the days shortened and autumn crept across the landscape, life at Silver Creek Ranch continued its gradual healing. School began, and all three Barnes children attended with more enthusiasm than they had shown the previous year. William's fighting decreased markedly. Sarah began to form friendships again, and Hannah thrived under the combined attention of her teacher at school and Eleanor at home. Zachariah had managed to arrange his shifts at the mine to allow him Sundays off, the first regular day at home he'd had since Mary's death. These became precious family days, with church in the morning followed by shared meals and activities that slowly rebuilt the bonds that grief had strained. Eleanor fit into these Sundays with natural grace, never attempting to take Mary's place, but creating her own role in the family's life. She taught Sarah to make her mother's special Sunday biscuits, helped William with woodworking projects, and sat for hours with Hannah, drawing pictures and telling stories. The relationship between Eleanor and Zachariah deepened gradually, built on small moments of connection. A shared glance over the children's heads when William said something unexpectedly funny. The brush of hands as they washed dishes together after supper. Quiet conversations on the porch after the children were asleep, where they slowly revealed more of themselves to each other. Zachariah told Eleanor about meeting Mary when they were both barely 18, about their journey west to build a life away from crowded eastern cities, about the struggles and joys of carving a ranch from the rugged Arizona landscape. Eleanor shared stories of her teaching experiences, her love of literature, her dreams of someday writing stories of her own. There were still boundaries. Eleanor rarely spoke of her family beyond the mention of her mother's death and her father's rigid expectations. Zachariah never pressed for more than she was willing to give, understanding that some wounds healed better when left uncovered. By October, the changes at Silver Creek were visible to anyone who knew the family. The ranch was functioning properly again, fences mended, garden harvested, animals tended. The house was clean and organized, meals appeared regularly on the table, and the children's clothes were mended and proper. Most significantly, the emotional atmosphere had transformed. Laughter could be heard from the barnyard as William taught Eleanor to ride. Music drifted from the house as Sarah practiced piano pieces her mother had once played. Hannah's artwork decorated the kitchen walls, bright splashes of childish color that Eleanor proudly displayed. Not everyone in Georgetown approved of these developments. Whispers began about the pretty governess living under the same roof as the widower. Some questioned the propriety of the arrangement, particularly as it became obvious that Zachariah and Eleanor shared more than an employer-employee relationship. The whispers reached Eleanor first, carried innocently by Hannah, who reported that her friend's mother had asked funny questions about Miss Thompson. Then came sidelong glances at church, and finally, a direct confrontation from Mrs. Peterson, the schoolteacher who approached Eleanor after services one Sunday. "Miss Thompson," the older woman said stiffly, "I wonder if I might have a word." Eleanor stepped away from the Barnes family, sensing the nature of the conversation to come. "Your work with the Barnes children is admirable," Mrs. Peterson began, her tone belying the compliment. "They've shown remarkable improvement since your arrival. However, I feel compelled to mention that there has been talk. Eleanor echoed, her voice steady despite the sudden chill in her veins. "About the appropriateness of your living arrangement," Mrs. Peterson continued. "A young, unmarried woman residing with a widower. It creates an impression that may damage your standing in the community. And potentially the children's as well." Eleanor had faced similar concerns in Tucson, veiled criticisms that masked deeper prejudices. She had learned to recognize them for what they were, attempts to control through shame. "I appreciate your concern for the children's welfare," she replied calmly. "But I assure you, there is nothing improper in my position at Silver Creek. I am a governess and housekeeper, nothing more." The lie tasted bitter, for in her heart, Eleanor knew she had become much more to the Barnes family, but she would not give Mrs. Peterson the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. "Nevertheless," the teacher persisted, "perceptions matter. Perhaps alternative arrangements could be considered. The widow Jenkins in town has rooms to let. You might continue your duties during the day while maintaining a more suitable living situation." Before Eleanor could respond, Zachariah appeared at her side, his expression making it clear he had overheard at least part of the exchange. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant, "I couldn't help but notice you've cornered Miss Thompson. I trust there's no problem." The teacher had the grace to look somewhat abashed. "Not at all, Mr. Barnes. I was merely expressing concern about certain perceptions in the community." "Perceptions," Zachariah repeated flatly. "You mean gossip." "Mr. Barnes, Miss Thompson's presence in my home has been nothing but a blessing to my children," Zachariah interrupted. "If the community has concerns about our arrangement, perhaps they might direct them to me rather than accosting her after church services." Mrs. Peterson drew herself up stiffly. "I intended no offense. Good day to you both." She turned and walked away, back rigid with indignation. Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but perhaps she has a point. If my presence is causing difficulty for your family—" "Stop," Zachariah said firmly. "You are not causing difficulties. Small-minded gossips with nothing better to do are causing difficulties." and I won't let them drive away the best thing that's happened to my family in a very long time." His words, spoken with such conviction in the churchyard for anyone to hear, warmed Eleanor deeply. But they didn't erase her concern. "The children need you," he finished. "We all do." The moment was interrupted by William calling that the wagon was ready for their return journey. The conversation remained unfinished, but Eleanor felt both reassured by Zachariah's defense and troubled by the potential consequences of their situation. That evening, after the children were asleep, Eleanor found Zachariah in the barn, repairing a harness by lamplight. She had been thinking about Mrs. Peterson's words all day, weighing her options and her responsibilities. "May I speak with you?" she asked from the doorway. Zachariah looked up, setting aside his work. "Of course." Eleanor entered, gathering her courage. "About what Mrs. Peterson said today. I think we need to consider the children's well-being." "That's all I've been considering," Zachariah replied. "They need you, Eleanor. I won't allow town gossip to take you away from them." "It's not just gossip," Eleanor said carefully. "It's their reputation, their standing in the community. They've already lost so much, I won't be the cause of further difficulties." Zachariah stood, closing the distance between them. "And what do you propose? That you move to town, leaving them without your presence in the evenings when Hannah has her nightmares, when Sarah needs help with her studies?" When William finally decides to talk about what's troubling him, always after supper and never before, Eleanor hadn't expected such resistance. "I would still be here during the day," she said weakly. "It's not the same, and you know it." Zachariah ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Unless you want to leave. Is that what this is about?" "No." The denial came swiftly, surprising them both with its vehemence. "No," she repeated more softly. "I don't want to leave, but I also don't want to harm the children or your standing in the community." Zachariah's expression softened. In the lamplight, his face showed every line of weariness and worry, but also a determination that Eleanor had come to admire deeply. "There is another solution," he said quietly. "One that would silence the gossips and ensure you could remain at Silver Creek permanently." Eleanor's heart stuttered in her chest. "Zachariah, marry me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. "This isn't how I planned to ask," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "I had thought to wait until Christmas, to do it properly with a ring and maybe the children's involvement. But Eleanor, I've known since that day at the creek that you belong here with us. With me." Eleanor's mind raced. Marriage had never been her ambition. Independence had always mattered more, especially after witnessing her mother's unhappiness in a union based more on financial security than love. But what she felt for Zachariah, for his children, was unlike anything she had experienced before. "The children," she began. "Adore you," he finished. "You've brought life back to them, Eleanor, to all of us." "And Mary?" she asked softly. "It hasn't even been a year." Pain flickered across Zachariah's face. "Mary would want the children to be happy, and me too, I believe. She was never one for prolonged mourning. She used to say life was too precious to waste in sadness." Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to order her thoughts. "This is unexpected, is it?" Zachariah asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "Haven't we been moving toward this since you arrived? Every conversation on the porch, every shared look over the dinner table, every moment we've spent building something together." He was right, Eleanor realized. Their connection had grown so naturally that she had scarcely acknowledged its progression from gratitude to friendship to something deeper. "I care deeply for you, Zachariah," she said carefully, "and for the children, but marriage is a serious commitment. I would need to be certain it's right for everyone involved." Zachariah nodded, disappointment visible in his eyes but also understanding. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Think about it. Talk to the children if you wish. But know that my feelings won't change. You've brought healing to Silver Creek, Eleanor. I believe you were meant to find us. Eleanor returned to the house with her emotions in turmoil. Marriage to Zachariah would give her a permanent place in this family she had come to love, would silence the gossips, would provide security she had never known in her itinerant teaching life. But it would also mean fully embracing a role she had never envisioned for herself, stepmother to 3 children still mourning their mother, wife to a man still healing from devastating loss. Was she ready for such responsibility? And was Zachariah truly ready to open his heart again, or was he simply seeking stability for his family? These questions kept Eleanor awake long into the night, staring at the shadows on her ceiling and trying to envision her future. The opportunity to gauge the children's feelings came unexpectedly the next day. Zachariah had left for the mine before dawn as usual, and Eleanor was helping the children prepare for school when Hannah asked innocently, "Miss Eleanor, are you going to be our new mama?" The question froze Eleanor mid-motion as she was braiding Hannah's hair. Sarah, packing lunch pails at the table, looked up sharply. William, who had been pulling on his boots by the door, went very still. "What makes you ask that, Hannah?" Eleanor managed to say, her fingers resuming their work on the braid. "Molly Jenkins said you were living in sin with Pa and that you were trying to replace our mama." Hannah reported matter-of-factly, clearly repeating words she didn't fully understand. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, both embarrassment and anger at the cruelty of adults who would speak such things where children could hear. Before she could formulate a response, William spoke up. "That's a lie," he said fiercely. "Miss Eleanor wouldn't do that. She always talks nice about Mama and shows us her picture and helps us remember her." The defense, coming from the child who had most resisted her presence initially, touched Eleanor deeply. "Thank you, William," she said softly. "You're right that I would never try to replace your mother. No one could do that. She was very special and loved you all very much." Sarah set the lunch pails on the table with deliberate care. "But Pa likes you," she said, her perceptive gaze meeting Eleanor's. "We all do. And you like it here, don't you?" "Very much," Eleanor admitted. "So you could stay forever," Hannah concluded with 6-year-old logic. "And maybe we could call you something besides Miss Eleanor, because that's awful formal for family." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. She finished Hannah's braid and turned the little girl to face her. "I care about all of you very deeply," she said carefully. "And nothing would make me happier than to stay at Silver Creek, but these are complicated decisions that your father and I need to discuss." "Pa asked you to marry him, didn't he?" Sarah said suddenly. "I heard him tell you he was going to, that night in the barn when I went looking for the cat's new kittens." Eleanor should have been shocked at the revelation that Sarah had overheard their private conversation, but somehow it seemed fitting that this family decision would involve the children's input, however unconventionally obtained. "Yes," she acknowledged, seeing no point in denial. "Your father did ask me. And you said no." William's voice held a note of hurt that belied his usual attempt at indifference. "I said I needed time to think," Eleanor corrected gently, "because it's a very important decision that affects all of us." "What's there to think about?" William demanded. "You like it here. We like having you here. Pa smiles again when you're around. Seems simple enough to me." Out of the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought wryly. Perhaps it was that simple after all. "If I were to marry your father," she said slowly, "how would that make you feel?" Truly, the children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Happy," Hannah said immediately. "It would be good," William admitted, scuffing his boot against the floor. "For Pa and for us, I guess." Sarah, ever the most thoughtful of the 3, took longer to answer. "I think Mama would approve," she said finally. "She always said Pa was hopeless on his own, and she would want someone kind to take care of us. You're kind, Miss Eleanor." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Sarah. That means a great deal to me." The school bell could be heard faintly from town, breaking the moment. "You'd better hurry," Eleanor said, reaching for the lunch pails. "We can talk more after school." As the children hurried down the path toward town, Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching until they disappeared from view. Their simple acceptance of the possibility of her marriage to their father had clarified her own feelings more effectively than hours of solitary contemplation. She loved this family, not just Zachariah, but all of them. The thought of leaving them was unbearable. And if marriage was the path that allowed her to remain at Silver Creek, to continue the work of healing they had begun together, then perhaps it was indeed as simple as William had suggested. That evening, when Zachariah returned from the mine, Eleanor was waiting on the porch. The children were inside, finishing their studies under Sarah's supervision, giving the adults a rare moment of privacy before supper. "The children know," Eleanor said without preamble as Zachariah climbed the steps. "About your proposal." He paused, hat in hand. "Sarah overheard us in the barn." Eleanor nodded. "And there have been comments at school. Hannah asked if I was going to be their new mother." Zachariah's expression darkened. "People have no right dragging children into adult matters. It's the reality of small-town life," Eleanor reminded him. "But the important thing is how the children feel about the possibility." "And how do they feel?" Zachariah asked cautiously. Eleanor smiled. "They seem to approve, quite enthusiastically, in fact." Hope dawned in Zachariah's eyes. "And you, have you had time to consider my proposal?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I have. And my answer is yes, Zachariah. I would be honored to become your wife and a mother to your children." The transformation in his face was immediate. Years of worry and grief seemed to fall away, replaced by a joy that took years off his appearance. In 2 strides, he crossed the porch and gathered her into his arms. "You've made me the happiest man in Arizona territory," he murmured, his face close to hers. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of the future rather than a culmination of the past. When they parted, Eleanor felt a certainty that had eluded her in all her previous decisions. This was right. This was where she belonged. The sound of the door opening behind them caused them to step apart. 3 faces peered out, William trying to look unimpressed but failing, Sarah with knowing satisfaction, and Hannah with unrestrained delight. "Did she say yes, Pa?" Hannah asked, bouncing on her toes. Zachariah laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks but was still precious for its rarity. "She did, little one. Miss Eleanor has agreed to marry me." Hannah squealed and threw herself at Eleanor, who caught her with practiced ease. Sarah followed more sedately but with genuine pleasure, offering a shy hug that Eleanor returned warmly. William hung back until Zachariah gestured him forward. "What do you say, son? Ready to make this official? Make us a complete family again?" William's attempt at nonchalance crumbled. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion he was still too young to fully express. As the family moved inside for supper, their conversation filled with excited plans and questions, Eleanor felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any she had experienced before. The path that had led her to Silver Creek, from Boston to St. Louis to Tucson, through disappointment and injustice, suddenly seemed purposeful rather than random. This family needed her, and she needed them more than she had ever allowed herself to acknowledge. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, a date chosen both for its natural festivity and because the mine closed for 2 days, allowing Zachariah time for a brief honeymoon trip to Tucson. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the Georgetown church with the children standing up with them, William as his father's best man, Sarah and Hannah as Eleanor's attendants. Eleanor wore a dress of deep blue silk, ordered from a catalog and altered by her own skilled hands. Zachariah appeared in a new suit that transformed him from weary miner to handsome groom. But the most remarkable transformation was in the children, who glowed with happiness and pride as they witnessed the union that would formally make Eleanor part of their family. The vows were traditional, but spoken with genuine emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachariah's kiss was tender yet possessive, a public declaration of feelings that had grown steadily since that first evening when Eleanor had restored order to his chaotic household. The small reception at Silver Creek Ranch brought the community together in celebration. Even Mrs. Peterson offered genuine congratulations, her previous concerns apparently resolved by the legitimization of Eleanor's presence in the Barnes household. As twilight descended and guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself on the porch with Sarah, watching as William helped Hannah build a snow fort in the yard, an unusual Christmas treat in the usually mild Arizona winter. "Are you happy, Mother Eleanor?" Sarah asked hesitantly, testing the new form of address they had agreed upon. Eleanor put her arm around the girl's shoulders, feeling a surge of love for this perceptive child who had lost so much and still found room in her heart for acceptance. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. "And you, Sarah? Are you happy with how things have changed?" Sarah leaned into Eleanor's embrace. "Yes, it felt wrong before the house without Mama, Pa working all the time, all of us so angry and sad. Now it feels right again." "Different but right. Your mother will always be part of this family," Eleanor assured her. "I hope you know that." "I do," Sarah said simply. "You make sure of it. That's one of the reasons Pa loves you, I think, because you don't try to make us forget her." The insight, so mature for a 12-year-old, reminded Eleanor again of how special these children were, each processing their grief differently, each finding their own path to healing. Zachariah joined them on the porch, slipping an arm around Eleanor's waist in a gesture that still felt new but increasingly natural. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, the name carrying a world of meaning. "Are you ready for our journey tomorrow?" "Almost," she replied. "Though I admit I'm nervous about leaving the children, even for a few days." "We'll be fine," Sarah assured them both. "Mrs. Johnson will stay with us and we'll take good care of the house and the animals." "I know you will," Zachariah said, pride evident in his voice. "You're becoming quite the young lady, Sarah Barnes." The girl blushed at the praise. "I'm going to help William and Hannah with their fort," she announced, clearly embarrassed by the emotional moment. As she hurried down the steps to join her siblings, Zachariah pulled Eleanor closer against the December chill. "Are you happy, Mrs. Barnes?" he asked, echoing Sarah's question. Eleanor looked out at the three children playing in the yard, their laughter ringing in the clear winter air. Beyond them stretched the land of Silver Creek Ranch, no longer neglected but thriving under their combined care. And beside her stood the man who had brought her into this life, whose love had given her a home and a purpose she had never dared to imagine. "Completely," she answered, turning to meet his gaze. "This is where I belong, where I was always meant to be." Zachariah's kiss was a seal on that declaration, a promise of the life they would build together, not perfect, certainly, but rich with love, patience, and the healing that comes from finding family in unexpected places. Spring came early to Georgetown in 1879. By March, the wildflowers carpeted the hills around Silver Creek Ranch in waves of color, and the garden that Eleanor and Sarah had planned during the winter months was beginning to show the first green shoots of vegetables and herbs. Life had settled into new rhythms for the Barnes family. Zachariah still worked at the mine, but had reduced his hours now that the ranch was functioning properly again, providing additional income. The extra time at home allowed him to know his children again, to teach William the skills of ranching, to listen to Sarah's piano practice, to tell Hannah bedtime stories. Eleanor had found her own place in the community, no longer the subject of gossip but respected as Mrs. Barnes, wife of Zachariah and stepmother to 3 increasingly well-adjusted children. She helped at the school when needed, led the children's program at church, and was gradually introducing innovations to Silver Creek, including a small library in what had once been Mary's sewing room, now filled with books ordered from catalogs with funds saved carefully from household expenses. The children continued to heal, each in their own way. William, approaching 11, had channeled his anger into productive energy, becoming his father's eager apprentice in ranch work. Sarah had blossomed socially, inviting friends to visit and showing a gift for music that Eleanor encouraged with regular practice sessions. Hannah, now 7, remained the sunshine of the household, her grief episodes becoming rare enough that they surprised everyone when they occurred. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in late March, the family was working together in the garden when Hannah suddenly dropped her small watering can and stared toward the cottonwood tree that shaded the yard. "Hannah," Eleanor asked, concerned by the child's strange expression, "are you all right?" "Mama used to sit under that tree and sew while we played," Hannah said quietly. "I just remembered." The other family members went still, waiting to see if this memory would trigger tears. But Hannah simply walked to the tree, placed her small hand on its rough bark, and then returned to her watering. "You think she'd like the flowers we're planting?" she asked Eleanor with childish directness. "I think she would love them," Eleanor assured her, exchanging a glance with Zachariah, who watched the interaction with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "Especially the sunflowers you chose." Hannah nodded, satisfied, and returned to her task with renewed purpose. That night, after the children were asleep, Zachariah found Eleanor in their bedroom, brushing out her auburn hair before the small mirror. "You handled Hannah's moment beautifully today," he said, coming to stand behind her and meeting her eyes in the reflection. "You always know exactly what to say to them about Mary." Eleanor set down her brush. "I try to honor their memories while helping them move forward. It's a delicate balance." "When you manage better than I ever could," Zachariah acknowledged. "You've brought healing to this family, Eleanor." "I don't know where we would be without you." Eleanor turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "We heal each other. That's what families do." Zachariah's kiss was tender, a gesture that carried all the love and gratitude he sometimes struggled to express in words. As they prepared for bed, Eleanor felt the now familiar contentment of belonging to this man, to these children, to this land. Life at Silver Creek would never be without challenges. The Arizona Territory was still a demanding place to carve out an existence. Children would continue to grow and change, bringing new questions and difficulties. The memory of Mary would always be part of their family story. But Eleanor Barnes, once a solitary teacher seeking only independence, had found something far more precious: a family formed not by birth but by choice, bound together by patience, understanding, and abiding love. Whatever the future might hold, they would face it together, their lives interwoven like the vibrant threads of the quilts that now warmed their beds through the desert nights. As spring turned to summer, and summer to fall, Silver Creek Ranch continued to flourish under their combined care. The wild grief that had once consumed the Barnes children had transformed into a healthy remembrance of their mother and an embracing of their new family configuration. And at the center of this transformation stood Eleanor, who had arrived with nothing but patience and love, exactly what they had needed to heal. On the first anniversary of their wedding, as the family gathered around the dinner table that had once been the site of so much chaos, Zachariah raised his glass in a toast. "To Eleanor," he said, his voice rich with emotion, "who taught us that family isn't just what you're born into, but what you build together, day by day." "To Mother Eleanor," the children echoed, using the name that had become natural over the months. Eleanor, looking at the faces around the table, her husband's eyes filled with love, William's growing confidence, Sarah's quiet contentment, Hannah's irrepressible joy, felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the path that had led her to Silver Creek Ranch and the family who had become her own. Outside the window, the Arizona sunset painted the landscape in gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the warmth within. From chaos and grief had come order and healing. From strangers had come family. From patience and love had come everything that mattered.